Ladies and gentlemen, God often allows our hearts to be broken, not because He wants to punish us, but because He understands that our hearts need to be realigned with His divine purpose. We often see brokenness as a tragic end, something to mourn, something to avoid at all costs. But in reality, heartbreak is often a necessary part of the process of growth and transformation. It is through brokenness that we come to recognize that we need God's intervention in our lives, that our hearts can no longer be tethered to the things, the people, or the ideas that once defined us. God, in His wisdom, allows these moments of pain to shatter our misconceptions and our comfort zones so that we can fully step into His intended purpose for our lives. At the core of this divine process is the understanding that God is not some distant, passive observer, but an active participant in every season of our lives, including the painful ones. Heartbreak, though often unbearable, serves as a powerful moment of breakthrough. It's the place where God can finally get our attention and speak to us in ways that are often impossible when we are content, comfortable, or complacent. When life is easy, we may not seek God with the same intensity. But when our hearts are broken, when everything that once seemed secure is torn apart, we are forced to turn to Him for strength, for wisdom, and for the healing only He can provide. When we experience heartache, we sometimes view it as a setback, as if God is taking something good away from us. But in truth, what we perceive as loss is actually a divine setup for something greater. In those moments when we are broken, we are being positioned for breakthrough. Our hearts may be torn open, but that is the very moment God begins to shape us into the people He created us to be. He knows that we cannot walk in our full purpose with hearts that are cluttered, wounded, or holding on to past hurts. So He allows the breaking to happen so that we can experience the healing and restoration that can only come through His grace. Heartbreak has a way of stripping us of our false securities and exposing our true vulnerabilities. It forces us to confront the places in our lives where we have been relying on our own strength or the approval of others instead of on God. When our hearts are broken, the walls we've built around ourselves crumble. We are no longer able to hide behind our pride, our achievements, or our possessions. It is in these moments of brokenness that God does His most profound work, breaking us so that He can mold us, reshaping our desires, and redirecting our paths to align with His perfect will. It's essential to understand that God doesn't break us to harm us, but to prepare us. Our hearts are often filled with desires, fears, and attachments that block us from fully stepping into the calling God has placed on our lives. The breaking process is like the pruning of a tree. While it may appear harsh, it is done with the intention of producing greater fruit. God removes the excess, the distractions, and the things that are not beneficial to our growth, so that we can bear the fruit He has destined for us. Without this pruning, we would remain stagnant, unable to grow and fulfill the purpose He has designed for us. What may feel like a painful, agonizing experience in the moment is, in fact, an invitation from God to realign our hearts with His plan. When He breaks our hearts, He is not abandoning us. He is preparing us for what lies ahead. In those moments, we may not understand the purpose behind the pain. We may question why God allows such suffering, but we must trust that He sees the bigger picture. His love for us is unwavering, and His plans for us are far greater than anything we could ever imagine. So instead of resisting the breaking process, we must learn to trust in God's divine wisdom. We must learn to lean into the pain, knowing that through it, God is doing a work that will ultimately lead to our transformation. What seems like a setback is actually a divine setup, and God is working all things together for our good. In the end, the brokenness will not defeat us, it will refine us, prepare us, and propel us into the next season of purpose, power, and destiny that God has in store. Pain is often viewed as an obstacle, something that stands between us and the fulfillment of our purpose. But in God's economy, pain is never an obstacle. It is a powerful tool He uses to refine and transform us. The reality is that our deepest pain often becomes the place where we encounter God's grace in its most profound form. It is in these moments of heartache, struggle, and suffering that we are most likely to experience God's presence in ways we would never encounter in seasons of comfort. Pain, although difficult and unwelcome, plays a crucial role in our spiritual growth and development. When life is easy, when everything is going well, it's easy to rely on our own abilities, our own understanding, and our own strength. We become self-reliant, relying on our own wisdom and resources to navigate life's challenges. But God knows that to reach the fullness of who we are called to be, we need to be forced into a deeper dependence on Him. Pain is the mechanism through which God calls us to move from self-reliance to absolute dependence on Him. When everything else fails and we are left with nothing but our faith, we find ourselves leaning into God in ways we never thought possible. In those moments of pain, we come to realize that we cannot make it on our own. It is in these very seasons that God works the deepest transformation in our lives. Through the pain, we are refined like gold being purified in the fire. Gold does not become pure by remaining in its raw state. It must endure intense heat to separate the impurities from the precious metal. Similarly, God uses our painful seasons to burn away the things in our lives that are not of Him: our pride, our fears, our misguided desires, and our insecurities. This purification process is not comfortable, but it is necessary. Without the fire, without the pain, we cannot be fully prepared for the plans God has for us. The refining process is the painful but necessary step to becoming who God has called us to be. Moreover, pain has a way of breaking us open, exposing the deepest parts of our hearts that we might otherwise keep hidden. In times of suffering, we cannot hide behind our achievements or possessions. All the walls we have built around ourselves to protect our vulnerability begin to crumble. It is in these broken, exposed moments that we encounter God's grace in its most profound form. God's grace is not simply an abstract concept or a distant idea. It is a tangible presence that meets us in our deepest pain, offering healing, peace, and hope. God's grace covers us when we are too broken to stand on our own, when we feel unworthy and undeserving of His love. It is in our most painful seasons that we learn the true depth of God's mercy and the power of His sustaining strength. Heartbreak, while deeply painful, is also necessary for growth. It is through pain that we are forced to face the areas of our lives where we need God the most. When life is smooth, we may neglect these areas, choosing to avoid confronting the wounds, fears, and weaknesses that lie within us. But pain doesn't allow us to run from these issues. It brings them to the surface, forcing us to deal with them head-on. As difficult as it may be, this confrontation with our brokenness is where true healing begins. God uses the pain to show us the areas where we need to grow and the ways we need to rely on Him for healing and restoration. Leaning into God during painful seasons allows us to experience a depth of relationship with Him that we might never have known otherwise. The Bible reminds us that God is close to the brokenhearted, and He saves those who are crushed in spirit. In our deepest pain, we are not abandoned. Instead, God draws near to us in a way that can only be understood through experience. As we cry out to Him, as we wrestle with our grief and confusion, we find that His presence is the only thing that sustains us. We encounter His love in a way that transforms our hearts and minds, and this encounter is what enables us to emerge from pain stronger, wiser, and more aligned with His purpose. Ultimately, the power of painful seasons lies in their ability to bring us into deeper intimacy with God. Pain does not have to be a sign of God's abandonment. It can be an invitation to draw closer to Him. As we lean into Him during the storm, we find that He is the anchor that holds us firm, even when everything else seems to be falling apart. The transformation that takes place in our hearts through pain is what prepares us for the next phase of our journey. Through pain we are refined, and through that refining we become more like Christ, ready to fulfill the unique purpose He has called us to. God does not break our hearts to destroy us. He breaks our hearts to heal us in a way that goes deeper than we could ever imagine. Often, when we experience heartbreak, we feel as though we are being torn apart, as if something irreparable has happened. However, what we fail to recognize in those painful moments is that God is not seeking to leave us broken. Rather, He is using the heartache to open us up, exposing the areas of our lives that desperately need His touch. The pain we feel becomes the very pathway through which His healing, peace, and restoration flow into us. The breaking process, though uncomfortable, is the gateway to a deeper experience of God's love and a more profound understanding of our purpose. When we go through seasons of heartache, it often exposes the parts of us that we have tried to protect or hide. Sometimes we have built walls around our hearts, protecting ourselves from past wounds, fears, or disappointments. These walls can make us feel safe, but they also keep us from experiencing the fullness of God's healing power. God, in His wisdom and love, allows these walls to come down. When our hearts are broken, we are left vulnerable, and in that vulnerability, we open ourselves to the work that only God can do in us. It is often in our deepest pain that we encounter God's most profound and life-changing healing. He doesn't just heal our wounds on the surface. He goes deeper, addressing the root causes of our pain and bringing about lasting transformation. Heartbreak is not just about the loss or disappointment we experience in the moment. It is about the transformation that follows. God uses the heartbreak to break open our hearts in a way that allows His healing to flow in and restore us in ways we never thought possible. The pain that we experience is not a punishment. It is the necessary soil in which God's healing can grow. Just as a seed must break open in order to sprout and grow into something new, our hearts must sometimes break in order for us to become who God has destined us to be. This process of breaking and healing is not always quick or easy, but it is always worth it. As we experience heartbreak, we also become more aware of the areas in our lives that need healing. These areas might be past wounds that we have carried for years, unresolved grief, or deep-seated fears that have kept us from living fully in God's purpose. God allows the breaking process to expose these areas so that they can be healed. The Lord does not want us to carry our pain indefinitely. He wants to heal the deep hurts that have shaped who we are. When we surrender our brokenness to Him, He is faithful to pour in His healing power and bring restoration where there was once hurt. The process of healing is not instant, but it is steady and sure. God doesn't simply put a Band-Aid on our broken hearts. He goes deep into the wounds, addressing the underlying issues and bringing lasting peace. It is through this deep healing that we find true restoration, not just a return to the way things were, but a new sense of purpose and direction. The healing that God offers is not about making us whole in the way we were before the heartbreak. Instead, it is about making us whole in a new, more powerful way, transforming us into the people He always intended us to be. When God heals our hearts, He gives us a new sense of purpose. We may not understand it in the moment, but the healing process opens our eyes to new opportunities, new directions, and new ways to serve others. Through our heartbreak, we often find that our lives take on a greater sense of meaning and mission. We are not just healed for ourselves, but we are healed in order to be a blessing to others. The very areas where we have experienced pain and heartbreak become the places where we can bring healing to others. God uses our brokenness to bring us closer to Him, but He also uses it to help us connect with others in a way that brings healing to their lives as well. Through the process of heartbreak and healing, we come to understand that God does not abandon us in our pain. He draws us closer to Himself. The heartache that once seemed like the end is now the beginning of a deeper relationship with God. It is in these broken moments that we come to realize that His love for us is unwavering, that He is always there to restore and renew us. He breaks our hearts open not to leave us in pieces, but to pour His healing power into us, restoring us to wholeness and giving us a new sense of direction and purpose in life. When God heals our broken hearts, we become more than we were before. We become the people He has always intended for us to be. In our moments of brokenness, it is easy to feel abandoned, as though God is distant or unaware of the pain we are experiencing. The heart may be shattered, our dreams may seem crushed, and the road ahead may appear uncertain, but we must remember this powerful truth. God is sovereign, even in our brokenness. His sovereignty means that He is in control of every moment, every circumstance, and every season we go through, including the seasons of pain. No matter how broken we feel, God is never caught off guard by the difficulties we face. He knows exactly what we are going through and has a plan to use even our moments of suffering for His divine purpose. When we go through heartbreak, it's easy to assume that God is somehow absent, or that He has allowed us to face pain without any purpose behind it. But God's sovereignty reminds us that He is always at work, even when we cannot see the bigger picture. The pain we experience does not happen by accident. It is part of God's greater plan for our lives. He is not surprised by our suffering. Instead, He is working through it, using every moment of pain to refine us, shape us, and draw us closer to Him. God's sovereignty assures us that our brokenness is not a sign of abandonment, but rather an opportunity for transformation. He is never powerless in our pain. He is not a passive observer, but an active participant in our lives, using every circumstance to mold us into the people we are meant to be. Even when we don't understand why we are going through a particular trial, we can trust that God is still working behind the scenes, orchestrating the events of our lives to fulfill His divine purpose. It is in our brokenness that we often experience God's sovereignty in its most profound way. In the moments when we feel most vulnerable and uncertain, God is closest to us. His sovereignty means that He is not bound by our limitations or by the pain we feel. He is working through our brokenness to bring about a greater good that we cannot yet see. This is where trust becomes essential. We may not understand the process, and the journey may feel long and difficult, but we must trust that God is working all things together for our good. His plan is greater than our understanding, and His timing is perfect, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. Throughout Scripture, we see countless examples of God's sovereignty in the lives of those who experienced great pain and loss. From Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brothers, to David, who was pursued by King Saul, to Jesus, who suffered on the cross. God used moments of brokenness to accomplish His divine will. In each of these stories, God's sovereignty was evident. What seemed like an insurmountable obstacle was actually part of God's perfect plan. Even when it seemed that things were spiraling out of control, God was still in control, working behind the scenes to bring about His greater purpose. We can take comfort in knowing that the same God who was sovereign in their pain is the same God who is sovereign in ours. The challenge, however, is to trust God when we don't understand the process. Our human nature wants to understand why we are going through pain and suffering. We want clear answers, explanations, and a sense of control over our circumstances. But God's ways are higher than our ways, and His understanding far exceeds ours. Trusting in His sovereignty means surrendering our need for answers and instead choosing to trust that He knows what is best for us, even when we cannot see it ourselves. In those moments of brokenness, God invites us to surrender our pain to Him, knowing that He is at work even when we don't understand the process. We may not be able to see how our pain fits into His larger plan, but we can trust that He is using it for our good and His glory. We can trust that His sovereignty will bring us through the pain, and that on the other side we will be stronger, wiser, and more aligned with His purpose. Our brokenness is never wasted in God's hands. He is always working, even when we don't see it. And as we trust in His sovereignty, we can find peace, knowing that God is in control, even in our most broken moments. Often we find ourselves clinging to things from our past, old mindsets, past hurts, and even unhealthy relationships, simply because they are familiar. They feel safe, even though they may not serve us well. These things, while comfortable, can hinder our growth, block our progress, and prevent us from stepping into the fullness of the life God has designed for us. It is in these moments when God begins to break us open, that He is not trying to harm us, but to remove the old so He can make room for something new. The breaking process is necessary for transformation. It is a divine chiseling, like a sculptor working with a block of stone, shaping us into the image he desires, a vessel ready for his work and his glory. God knows that in order for us to become who he created us to be, we must let go of the things that are no longer beneficial to our growth. The past, with its baggage, its wounds, and its hurts, has a way of keeping us stuck, even when we are called to move forward. But just as a sculptor must chisel away at the stone to reveal the masterpiece hidden within, God uses the breaking process to remove the layers of our lives that are not in alignment with his purpose. These layers, our old ways of thinking, our fear of change, our unwillingness to forgive, must be removed so that we can be shaped into the people he has always intended for us to be. When we go through the breaking process, we may resist it because we are afraid of losing the familiar. We may want to hold on to the past, even though it has brought us pain and limitations, because it feels comfortable. But God, in his infinite wisdom, knows that the old must be removed so that the new can take its place. The new mindset, the new relationships, and the new opportunities that God has prepared for us cannot coexist with the old unless we allow him to remove what is holding us back. This process of breaking is not about destruction, it is about transformation. God is not seeking to tear us down, but to rebuild us according to his perfect design. Sometimes the hardest part of this process is recognizing what needs to be removed. Our old mindsets and past experiences can be deeply ingrained in us. We may have carried certain beliefs about ourselves, about God, or about the world for so long that they have become part of our identity. But God wants to free us from these limiting beliefs so that we can see ourselves as he sees us, whole, loved, and full of purpose. The old ways of thinking that have kept us in bondage must be replaced by the truth of God's word, which tells us that we are more than conquerors, that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and that we have a divine purpose to fulfill. This process of breaking is not limited to our internal beliefs. It also applies to our external relationships. Sometimes we hold on to relationships that are toxic or no longer serve us. These relationships, while familiar, may be hindering our growth and keeping us from stepping into the new things God has for us. God, in his love, will sometimes allow these relationships to be broken so that we can make room for healthier, more life-giving connections. It is not easy to let go of people who have been part of our lives for a long time, but God knows that in order to fulfill our purpose, we must surround ourselves with those who will help us grow. The breaking process is essential for preparing us to receive the new. Just as a field must be plowed and cultivated before new seeds can be planted, our hearts must be broken open and cleared of the old so that God can sow the new. God is not interested in patching up the old ways of thinking and living. He wants to transform us from the inside out. The new things he has for us, new dreams, new opportunities, new relationships, require us to be a new vessel, ready to hold all that he wants to pour into our lives. The breaking may be painful, but it is always purposeful. It is through the breaking that we become more like Christ, shaped by his hands, refined by his love, and made ready for the work he has prepared for us. When we allow God to remove the old and make room for the new, we are positioning ourselves to walk in the fullness of his plan for our lives. God's breaking process is a loving act of preparation, ensuring that we are vessels fit for his glory, vessels ready to fulfill our divine calling. When we look back on our lives, we will see that every moment of brokenness was a moment of divine shaping, a moment when God was making us into something greater than we ever imagined. The old has passed away and the new has come. God has used every trial, every hardship, and every breaking moment to prepare us for the new thing he is doing in our lives. Let go of the old, trust in his process, and embrace the new. God is shaping you into the masterpiece he designed you to be. A broken heart is not the end of the story. It is often the gateway to a restored life and purpose. When we face heartache and pain, it can feel like our world is falling apart, as though all hope is lost and the life we envision for ourselves is slipping away. But in God's hands, brokenness is not a dead end. It is a transformative beginning. God allows our hearts to be broken not to punish us, but to create space for something greater. The brokenness that we experience serves as the very foundation for a deeper relationship with God, a clearer vision for our lives, and a renewed passion for His will. When God breaks us, it is because He has plans for us that are far greater than anything we could imagine. He sees the big picture, and He knows that in order to fully step into the fullness of our purpose, we must be refined. Our hearts, our desires, and our understanding of who we are and who He is must be aligned with His greater plan. God does not break us because He enjoys seeing us suffer, but because He loves us too much to leave us where we are. The breaking process clears away the distractions, the misconceptions, and the attachments that have kept us from stepping fully into the calling He has placed on our lives. Brokenness, though painful, creates a unique opportunity for God's presence to fill us in a way that nothing else can. When we are broken, we are no longer relying on our own strength, our own plans, or our own abilities. We are laid bare before God, and it is in these moments of vulnerability that His presence can move in and work in ways that we could never anticipate. It is often when we are at our lowest, when we feel most fragile, that God's power and grace become most evident. He fills the empty spaces of our hearts, pouring in the healing, restoration, and renewal that we need. The process of brokenness, though hard, allows us to experience God's presence in a deeper way than we ever could when we were whole and self-sufficient. As God fills us, He begins to renew our vision for our lives. In the midst of our pain, we may lose sight of the future. We may feel like we have lost direction, and our dreams may seem shattered. But God uses our brokenness to recalibrate our vision, to show us the purpose He has for us in a new light. Often the very things that break our hearts are the things that refine our vision and clarify our path. When we experience brokenness, we become more attuned to God's voice, more sensitive to His leading, and more aware of the deeper desires He has placed in our hearts. Brokenness strips away the superficial and allows us to see the things that truly matter. The calling God has placed on our lives, the people we are meant to serve, and the purpose we are meant to fulfill. Moreover, the restoration of purpose through brokenness ignites a passion for God's will. When we experience God's restoration in our lives, when we see how He has brought healing to our broken hearts, we cannot help but be stirred with a passion to fulfill His purpose. Our hearts are no longer weighed down by the wounds of the past. They are set ablaze with a renewed desire to serve God, to walk in His will, and to make a difference in the world around us. The brokenness that once seemed like an obstacle becomes the very fuel that drives us to pursue God's will with greater urgency and determination. Through the restoration process, God brings us into alignment with the calling He has on our lives. We may have had dreams, plans, and desires before, but in our brokenness, we come to realize that God's purpose for us is far greater than anything we could have imagined. The pain we experience becomes a stepping stone, not a stumbling block. It is through this process that we are fully aligned with the plans and purposes of God. When we allow Him to restore us, we become the vessels He created us to be, equipped and ready to fulfill the unique calling He has placed on our lives. The restoration of purpose through brokenness is not a one-time event, but a continual process. God is constantly working in us, refining us and aligning us with His will. As we surrender our broken hearts to Him, He restores us, piece by piece, to the image He intended from the very beginning. Our pain becomes the soil in which our purpose takes root. And as we heal, we grow in our ability to serve Him and live according to His plans. In the end, brokenness is not the end of our story. It is the beginning of a new chapter. Through brokenness, God creates the space for His presence to fill us, for our vision to be renewed, and for our passion for His will to be ignited. As He restores us, we are fully aligned with the calling He has placed on our lives, ready to walk in the purpose and destiny He has prepared for us. The broken heart in God's hands becomes the gateway to a restored life, a life filled with meaning, mission, and fulfillment in Him. Beloved, understand this truth. Brokenness is not a sign of defeat, but a powerful invitation to transformation. God does not break us to destroy us. He breaks us to rebuild us. Every heartache, every painful season, every moment of brokenness is a divine process, orchestrated by a loving God who desires to restore us to the fullness of His purpose. In the crushing, He is making us vessels that are worthy of His glory and ready for His work. The heartache you've endured is not wasted. It is the very thing that creates the space for God's presence to enter and renew you. It's in our brokenness that God shapes our hearts, refines our vision, and realigns our passions with His will. Through this process, we discover that our purpose is not defined by our pain, but by the power of His restoration. What once seemed like a setback is actually a setup for something greater, something divinely aligned with the calling He has placed on your life. Trust the sovereignty of God, even when you don't understand the process. Know that your pain is not in vain. It is not the end, it is the beginning of something extraordinary. God is working all things together for your good. Your brokenness is a gateway to healing, to new vision, and to a purpose that is greater than you could ever imagine. Allow Him to break you open, to restore you, and to reveal the divine purpose He has uniquely designed for you. Embrace the process. For through it, you are being shaped into the person you were always meant to be. A person ready to walk in the fullness of God's purpose and fulfill the destiny He has prepared for you. Keep your heart open, trust His plan, and step forward in faith, for the best is yet to come.